Okay, hello and welcome everyone to today's event on Segregation of Duties Compliance within Dynamics AX. I'm Jason Gilbert from msdynamicsworld.com, and joining us for today's event are Amir Kosniati, Cody Bess, and Chuck Walker of Arbela. As we get started, please know that you can add your questions at any point. We also have a poll question that I'm going to just bring up now so we can understand a little more about you in the audience and your interests and concerns. There will be time for Q&A at the end. Please do enter your questions anytime throughout the presentation using the Q&A block that you see to the right of the slides. And without further delay, I'm going to hand it off to Amir to get things started.
Hello all, and welcome to our webinar today on the roadmap to segregation of duty and compliance within Dynamics AX. Very happy to have you guys join. As Jason mentioned, if you do have any questions, please feel free to field them in the side menu pane, and we'll have some moderators during the course of the webinar take a look at them, and we'll address them at the tail end. I'd like to introduce our Vice President of Professional Services, Chuck Walker, who's going to give you a quick overview of Arbela before we pass it over to Cody for the demo.
Go ahead, Cody. Just move ahead, please.
So today's agenda will be covering, as I said, a little intro about Arbela. We're going to be going into why auditing and security manager is a chosen solution for security management and auditing compliance requirements by many of our Dynamics AX clients. Then we're going to jump into just a quick breakdown of what the capabilities and services around it is. And the main topics that we're going to address based on feedback about what people were looking for is basically how to dive in and analyze Dynamics AX roles and SOD conflicts, how to look over data and access monitoring, and why auditors place these requirements for investigative approaches. What are some of the popular reports that we've seen auditors request from their clients, and how to reduce the overall licensing cost by as much as 25%. We'll dive in and showcase our licensing manager and go over that. And then lastly, we're going to cover security and audit preparation services, and we have a robust capability around that. If you can go to the next slide, Cody.
Hi, everyone. This is Chuck Walker, and again, thank you for joining. Just a little bit about Arbela Technologies and how we've arrived with our security management solution. We've were founded in 2002, and since day one have specifically worked in the Dynamics realm, Dynamics AX and Dynamics CRM. Gold partner like many in 2004. We've got a national and worldwide presence with our offices, corporate office here in California and offices across the U.S. and in Europe. Why we've developed the ASM solution is our history in working with kind of large, complex, multi-location, multi-site companies that we've worked with. Spent a lot of time in the manufacturing and distribution world. As I mentioned, we are a Dynamics AX and CRM partner. It's all that we do. We have developed a security compliance and auditing solution. And that really goes back to our roots since the early days of AX and working with and helping our clients trying to implement and manage security that evolved into the development of solutions that we're still working up through even now getting ready for AX7. And along with the multi-site locations, we've also developed some other tools in order to centralize and manage data, whether it be customers, whether it be vendors, whether it be products in terms in all solutions from 2009 to 2007, or through the AX7, excuse me. Go ahead, Cody. Just a little bit like all of the AX partners where we've been involved with, we're involved with the since 2004 gold certified, we're a competency winner. We're involved with the TAP program with all solutions since version 4 with AX, identified as a partner. So we've just been around the AX space, and as you can tell, have received a number of awards and continue to expand the use of Dynamics AX. So with that said, some of our clients that are using our ASM solution, as you can tell, this ASM solution goes across all industries, whether it be manufacturing, whether it be services, distribution, construction. It's, as you can tell from this selected group of clients here on this slide. So with that said, Cody, I'm going to turn it over to you to really get into the details of our ASM solution.
Thank you, Chuck. So what I want to start with is going into why auditing and security manager. So why would you even use a tool that has these capabilities? So the answer may be obvious, but principally, security risk is important to pretty much a company of any size. When you're implementing AX and ERP, usually security is an afterthought, right? So generally, it's a gray area that starts to materialize after you go live, and then the problems occur, right? And then your audits come. So usually, it's a reactive task that you have to do with a very tight schedule. The tasks are manual, require a lot of man hours, a lot of extra work, and a lot of input from a lot of different personnel. And then after you have completed your task trying to get your security in order for the appropriate level of access, for SOX compliance or whatever, what have you, you still lack basic tools to keep track of what you have done and what you need to do in the future. So you lack tools to audit, and you lack tools for auditors and for audits, right, internal or external otherwise, right? So that answers that question, the initial question. So we've collected customer responses to surveys from over 100 of our ASM clients across a variety of industries represented in the slides that Chuck had showed you before. Some of those are life sciences, industrial, manufacturing, et cetera, retail, food, grocery distribution. And what we've recovered is basically a short list of very important areas that have to do with IT risks, security, deploying security, and just the day-to-day management of IT solution and security. And using the tool like ASM, we found that you have potential time savings in most of these areas of roughly 80%, right? Just by being trained to use the tool, using the reports, and being able to monitor and keep track of the IT implementation and management, right? So audit and report prep is one of our first big area, followed by managing IT risks in general, security deployment, initial security deployment during an ERP implementation, security management, post-go live. And I might add that we're able to accomplish the reduction in the time spent on these tasks by basically visualizing the security using the ASM tool. With the visualization, you're also able to modify the user role assignments quickly. You're able to modify the actual roles and the duties and the privileges that are assigned to them, and also user groups, right? So we're talking user groups in 2009 as they apply to security, and we're also talking user groups in 2012 as they apply to workflow tasks and other areas of the software. And finally, IT staff involvement in security-related issues, basically IT ticketing and requests for additional access. So prior to using a tool like ASM, you would have to run through a ticketing and a request system, basically manually identify if this user really requires that level of security, and possibly have to build a fresh new role from scratch, not knowing really clearly what gives access to what in the system. But with the visualization that the security manager offers, you're able to not only accomplish that task quicker, but also reduce the number of people that have to be involved in those tasks. So the answer to the question is also questions. So you're basically saying, so why would I have a focused and automated security and auditing tool? So essentially, ASM is pretty good, and it doesn't really require a lot of input after you train yourself on it or after you've been trained on it. It's designed with the end user in mind, with a UI-focused approach, and you're definitely going to recognize, as soon as I pull up the security manager and the security manager module on the screen, you're going to recognize the layout of the form. You're going to recognize it's very much like the rest of Dynamics AX user interface, and the language and everything is very familiar. So it's not a very high investment in terms of learning how to use it. So I'm going to follow up with a summary of the capabilities. So we're talking about the capabilities of the software, and we're also talking about how we use the software to accomplish your organizational goals of preparing for audits, and also the day-to-day management of security, as well as implementing and re-implementing your security model in Dynamics AX. So our first two list of capabilities. First, we have our security implementation and audit prep services that I've just mentioned, right? So essentially what we do is and I'll mention a little bit more about this when we go into segregation of duties. We go and we perform essentially an analysis on your current security model. We take a snapshot of your current state, and we identify what are the risks, right? So essentially, according to your internal controls that you may have already developed, and also with your audit requirements, identified from your partner firms and your audit firms. Okay, so what do we need to lock down in the system? We basically we have a visual display of those tasks, and then we decide what we want to lock out. So essentially, it's like a role updates. We update roles, not the standard roles, but we essentially copy the roles as a best practice. We copy the standard roles, and then we modify those and use that as our new standard role base moving forward. So that is a summary of the security implementation. In terms of audit prep, we focus mostly on the update of the security model and then the monitoring afterwards, right? So we give you visibility of what changes have occurred in the system, what changes do you need to make by performing an analysis of your security model, and also having on-hand reports and data and access monitoring tools on hand when auditors require that information. So essentially, the availability of reports is half of the power of the audit tools. So moving on to security management. So basically, the security build or the security rebuild is a result of the analysis for security implementation. The actual tool for ASM allows you to build with the visualization I mentioned in the past slide. I'm actually going to pull that up on the screen right now. So what we have now is the Security Manager module, right? So as you can see, it has typical user experience for the rest of Dynamics AX, a common report setup, inquiries, periodic. What I want to focus on right now is the Security Manager cockpit is what it's called. And what this does, it gives you an at-a-glance view of visualized security within Dynamics AX. I'm going to expand this a little bit to give you a good view of it. Right, so what we have first is, in our first section, we have an area that gives you an at-a-glance statistics of how many roles, duties, privileges, and how many of our enhanced segregation of duties rules, as well as the previous standard segregation of duty rules that you may have had previously to implementing with ASM, and how many active users you have currently in the system, right? On the three panes towards the right, you have your very familiar menus, everywhere from home to fixed assets, general ledger, et cetera, et cetera. But you also have various levels of access that are visualized. So essentially, if I'm looking at this, what you see is I don't have a role selected. So because I have no role selected, you see everything is all red, essentially telling me I have no access in any of these modules. So I can drill down in these modules and say which menu items does the specific role give you access to. For example, if I was to load an accountant, for example, load those permissions, you'll be able to see visualized security. And to load the permissions for each role, it generally takes a moment. and I just so happen to have selected the role with the most duties and privileges. So accountant probably would take the longest in terms of loading. So now in the three panes to the right, you can see the visualization of the security. An accountant has the role, has almost unfettered control over APAR and the general ledger modules. And if I go and take a deeper look, I go and I can see how much access I have to each menu item from the forms. I can actually change the security access if I have a project loaded currently. If I have an AOT project loaded, which I can load directly from here, no involvement with the AOT is required. I can make changes to the security model directly from the security manager. I simply bring up a context menu and decide what level of access I want this menu item to have, right? I can also view access directly in that form. So if I click this, it'll bring up that allocation form. Actually, more realistically, general ledger, and then I bring that. It actually pulls the access levels and it visualizes for that form. We have color coding when you actually get into the form in the grid, which displays what level of access, and we've pre-selected the color code to be yellow. This is a parameter. We could set it up if it's too harsh for your eyes or if you're colorblind. We can change the colors, right? And then I can visualize the security. I can actually change it from here, right, if I wanted to. And every change in the security is going to affect whatever role I have loaded. I can also make changes directly to a privilege or a duty in terms of security from here. It's a best practice to make those changes from the roles. If you do make changes from the roles, you can also have security added to the privileges, either creating privileges, modifying, which actually we recommend creating new privileges if you want to modify them, because if you make changes to privileges, it's going to affect every role that has that privilege and every duty that has that privilege. So what we recommend is basically making the changes and going through our wizards. And our wizards is a way of enforcing best practices on the user who is making the changes. You only have three options, and basically there's a naming convention attached, and you can choose the naming convention. The naming convention is attached to each new security object that's created, each privilege, each duty, each new role that's duplicated, etc. So I'm just going to cancel out. I'm not actually going to make any changes to security. So now you can actually see how you can make changes to security after you've planned it out, and you can visualize it at any point in time based on any role, any duty, or any privilege. And you can see how what level of access the menu items have. So minimizing that. So that's the security management aspect of building security with the visualization. You can also build security with a recorded process. And very quickly, I'll show you that as well. There's two ways to do this. Let's say you have a user. From a user perspective, I want to track a business process, and I want to take that business process that I tracked in AX and turn it into a new role, right? So I simply use this little form. It's called a security tracer. Once I start recording, you see the recording sign in the corner, in the upper left corner. And then I go to whatever business process that I'm required to do. And every touch point that I go through is being captured as a menu item or a security object, and its level of security that should be assigned. And as you can see, the security level visualizations are here. If I want a quick reference as to what each color code means, I just expand the security manager information section that's added to each form while the security is visualized. So if I stop and then I go to review, then you have at a glance all the security objects that were touched. And now if I just include this into a role, I've captured the entire business process. So this is a way of limiting access to specific users and a quick way of building a security model. And returning to the Security Manager cockpit, you can also test a specific role that you have. There we go. So this is the window that I have the accountant role. I can actually open up a new session with that role selected and run through the software and see visually what I have access to. Now, I'm not going to do that now for the sake of time, but it's a very useful ability to be able to do directly from the Security Manager cockpit. With reference to tracking security, so everything that the security tracer has tracked, as an administrator, I have visibility of that. So now you can see, and let me expand this a little bit so you can have a better view. All the security objects that were captured, I can also view here. So I can assign the user to track a business task for my purposes, and then everything that that user enters is visible by me as the administrator or as the security manager using the cockpit. And I can also build security from here as well. As you can see, I can set the access levels for the role that's assigned directly from here. And we also offer services. We help you with planning your security. Basically, how do you migrate? Let's say you have a test environment, you have a dev environment that you do all of your security updates. You make those updates. We'll help you determine the best path moving forward with that, moving from that dev environment to your test environment, testing your role security, making changes, and then pushing that security model to your production environment. So we help you with that. We help you evaluate licensing. We have services, and we use the product as well for that. I'll get a little bit more into licensing as it's our third topic. So one more note on this screen. You can manage all the, because the security manager is based on the roles, duties, and privileges, and the security model, it also tracks, manages, and reports on any customizations and any add-ons that you have in the ISV layer. We can also get visibility of that and all the security objects that are added to AX because of those ISV products. So moving on to the risk and compliance capabilities. So we briefly mentioned segregation of duties. We have enhanced the standard AX segregation of duty function but we also left it intact. The enhancements are basically, it makes it so that it tracks at the object level. So each menu item and each menu item's permissions and level of access are able to be tracked with the enhanced segregation of duties versus just a duty in AX. So our product allows you to model your IT controls within a segregation of duty rule. You also identify the conflicts, and there's different processes you can choose to resolve the conflicts that you find with segregation of duties. Let's say a specific user has two roles that are incompatible due to the overarching task that it allows. So those two roles are assigned, the user is assigned, and if it's a conflict within a role, that single role conflict is also discovered. And you have three choices for resolving conflicts. You can use a workflow that we've developed as part of the suite for segregation of duties and compliance. We've also we leverage the standard AX functionality for electronic signature. And there's also a standard one-step conflict resolution approach that we can also use if the other approaches are more complex than your company currently requires. And we have a place in the segregation of duty rules to capture any of your external steps that you take to mitigate if the conflict resolution is not to change security or allow the security. If it's just allow the security to continue with the conflict, you can enter what mitigating steps you take outside of the software. For example, management review or reports or something of the sort. You can definitely enter it into the rules and capture that. So you and your auditors have an at-a-glance view of your IT controls. And finally, brings us to our monitoring reports. We've mentioned the monitoring for the data and the data monitoring that we can package with any of our services. Now, talking specifically about the monitoring capabilities, we monitor data and we monitor user access, right? So these are both features that we've added to the newest version. We also have reports that show a matrix view of users, user role assignments, licensing, and the makeup and configuration of roles, duties, and privileges. So we have a series of those matrix view reports that you can export to Excel and get a very detailed view of your security model. We have change logs for the security changes themselves, and we have change logs for user and role assignments and user role changes. And finally, you have integration of Power BI. We can help you set that up with you as part of a solution, and we can get you set up to report out of Power BI based off of the security queue. Sorry. And finally, for this screen, one of the highlights of our approach to security and developing our product overall is that it's based on the new features that we add to our solution is based on customer feedback, but not just broad customer feedback such as, I'd like to see this in your next version. It's more like, these are the audit requirements that we're faced with, and this is the way that we need to have our reports displayed. This is how it needs to be exported, and based off of specific customer feedback as well as surveys and our own communications with auditors and partner CPA firms. So moving to our first topic, right? And we're at the halfway point, which is a great place to start going into our segregation of duties conflicts. I'm going to show you in the software after I've mentioned the actual process we go through. So when we're doing an SOD analysis project, I would actually call it an analysis and implementation project. We start by looking at your business processes, not necessarily your business processes, but your business segments, business processes, or business cycles. For example, quote to cash or simply purchasing, right? So we can look at it however your business is divided up, and we can identify tasks. We model those tasks vertically and horizontally on a matrix, and then we work with you and your end users and your business experts to determine where are the actual risks for fraud in your business. We have standard matrix, and we have standard assignments of risk. However, it's more important for us to see what you perceive to be your high area of risks, right? You know your employees better than anyone. So that's the first step. Second, we take those matrices and we model those into the segregation of duty rules. We can also take your IT controls and we can model those directly into the rules as well. After creating the rules, we identify the conflicts. So we're talking about segregation of duty conflicts. So two conflicting tasks. Now that we've identified two conflicting tasks, the menu items that allow access to those tasks, and the level of access required to create a conflict, we run a batch job in AX to identify the conflict. Now this batch job, it can be run periodically, it can be run ad hoc or at will, and you can just have a view of those conflicts exported without it being recorded. The next step after that, after identifying the conflicts, we attempt a resolution. So this is where we put the ball in your part, in your court, right? So we basically work with you to identify, if it's not already identified with IT controls documented, how do you intend to resolve this from a standard perspective, right? And basically what are your standard approaches to resolve conflicts of segregation of duty? And also, where are the outliers? So where would we diverge from a standard approach and have special risk mitigating steps as opposed to a simple denial of role assignments? And finally, we train you on the reports, and we leave you with a process to move forward. Sometimes we even help you with the audit itself in your IT system, and we provide continuing support and training. And we have various reports and logs that you can use. We have roles for your auditors if you have very hands-on auditors that want to go into your software. We have roles that allow them to use the ASM tool with a little bit of training and a user role assignment. They can go and pull their own reports so that they can manipulate them outside of the AX however they want. So the segregation of duties. Let's leave the security manager cockpit for a moment. And we're going to return to the security manager module, right? So I'm going to make the view here a little simpler. Because I want to focus on what we're looking at here. We're talking about segregation of duties. So it starts with the rules. Our rules are in setup. So as you can see here, I have a list of pre-existing rules, right? We have a nice list that we've accumulated over time just working with clients, maybe 130 plus. We also, we test from time to time, so you see a couple rules that aren't as robust. But we see we have a robust list of rules, okay? If they're currently active in the system, when I click check rule, it'll search the system and look for violations. So this just happens to be disabled, so I just run to a rule that's currently enabled. So I can do this to test the completeness of my rule, or I can also do it to record and make a record of the violations or the conflicts. So as you can see here, there's actually no conflicts currently in our system that have to do with this particular segregation of duty rule. So so everything I just mentioned previously, here's the view. So we capture two objects, right? Two objects that are in conflict. Let's say, for example, one is opening the vendor invoice and another one is processing checks, right? So we identified the two security objects. If you're not very technical, we have help. We have these ghost forms that pop up, these translucent forms. So this allows me to basically jump through the software and, again, trace a business process to whatever it is that I'm looking to track. And, of course, every securable object that's being tracked ends up in the trace form. And then I can simply assign that to the left-hand side for our main object or to the right-hand side for our securable object, our menu item that should not be coexisting in a user role assignment. So assigning not assigning security, but creating the segregation of duty rules is that simple. We have a lot of help with the function that I just showed you. You can import, if you already have a nice robust list, or if you want to import our standard list, you can use the import or export functions. Export is useful to move between environments, and you can export it to Excel as a mass list that you can reference. So we've created the rules. What next? All right, so we've created the rules. We have user role assignments set up in the system. Now we want to track it. We want to find our conflicts. So we go to the periodic section, and then we click verify compliance with user role assignments. So this is a batch job. We can run it whenever we want. And it's going to capture the conflicts, and it's going to put them in a list of conflicts under common. So once we have our conflicts, we have various choices we make, right? So our choices can be, if we found a user role assignment that should not occur. So an AP clerk, or an accountant versus a accounting supervisor, right? So let's say I say, oh, you know what? I actually want those. I want to allow the assignment, right? So I simply give a reason for the override. It asks me if I want to apply this rule to all these conflicts that are like. I say no. I want to look at it at a case-by-case basis. So currently what I did was I resolved the conflict. I proposed a resolution. Because I had the workflow set up, now I can submit this to workflow. The workflow is simple to set up, and we have templates to set up the workflow that you can start with. You can be one-step approvals or as many as you want. You can choose not to use the workflow. And instead, you can choose to use the standard approach. The standard approach is much simpler. It does not require an approval. It's simply, I propose a resolution, and that resolution is now law. And that's the last step that we would have for the standard approach. As I mentioned before, we also have the electronic signature. It borrows from the standard AX electronic signature functionality. So I'm not going to show that one. I'm simply making reference to that one. So what about reportability? All right. So we have segregation of duty conflicts. We have resolutions. Where do I view the totality of this? Okay. So we have an inquiry under segregation of duties. Essentially, any information that we need about a segregation of duty rule, I can pull up. Or a segregation of duty conflict, right, and the rules that are applying to it. And then, of course, I can export this list to Excel. Under reports, I have the standard segregation of duties rules list that I can pull up, or I can pull up the conflicts in a report form if I wanted to put it out as a PDF, for example. So continuing on with the topic, just to review the process we go through. We identified a business process, right? We gave some examples of different processes or process cycles that we identify tasks for and assign a level of risk. After identifying the tasks and the level of risk, we create rules to go with them. For example, an accounts payable clerk and a purchasing agent, and two tasks are identified within those rules. The third step would be applying the rules to the existing security model and running the conflict batch job. And you can leverage our rule list for that. And the fourth step is to resolve the conflicts, come up with a standard approach to resolving and approving conflicts, whether you want to use workflow electronic signature or a standard approach, and then monitor and review. So our next topic is how we use data and access monitoring, and why do auditors generally require an investigative approach like this, right? So basically the answer is, so you can proactively look after what users have access to, right? Or more particularly, for an example, securing and monitoring, right? So an example is you have a house, right? So, the segregation of duties is a lock, right? So that's your first step. And then once you've applied the security rules to minimize the segregation of duties, you still have your segregation of duties running regularly to detect any new conflicts, right? However, you're giving out keys to people to access your house. So in order to know who is accessing your house, you set up security cameras, right? Who can access your house, right? So you have the security camera. In order to know who actually walked in, right, you have the camera. That camera is the actual data monitor, right? So the data monitor is the camera, and the access key or the key card, that is the access monitor. So the access monitoring says who has access to what, and the data monitoring says who actually made changes, right? And you have a couple of examples here. Joe user can access the credit limit, or he can access the customer table, or he can access the customer form. But data monitoring actually tells me Joe user actually changed the credit limit value, and the value was actually changed from this value to that value at this time and date and by this user. So generally, auditors look for controls. And what better way to cover all your bases than to have an ongoing, continuous effort to see who can access and who actually made the changes. And one note that I want to make about data monitoring is that it actually tracks outside of the normal AX client. So essentially, data monitoring reaches into the database, So essentially, any changes made in SQL to any of the tables are represented in data monitoring. And because it's so overarching, it's a very good tool to use to find fraud, or to find instances of fraud and to track them and track them down to a particular user. And you have the segregation of duties and the role security updates and reports to make sure that fraud is not actually occurring. Right. So I'm going to display the data monitoring examples. So we're back in the Security Manager module, right? It's very small looking, I know. Minimize our segregation of duties and expand our monitoring. We start with rules. So for access monitoring, we start with some rules. We have a very robust list that covers many of the functions that businesses have established to be very important for all transactional functions. We assign risk levels, an effective date. You can import and export again. And again, just like with the segregation of duties rules, you can actually check the rule. So this checks that specific rule and determine if there's any users that are actually follow with a user role assignment that actually performs this task. Unlike the segregation of duties rule, we're only tracking one menu item, one AOT object, and assign a minimum level of access. Let's say we only want to track who can activate bombs and the level of access to click that button or to use that function is full control. Then what's going to happen when I run check rule, it's only going to return the users who have full control with the privilege that gives access to activate bombs. And if any of records were returned for users who can access, you'd be able to view it for this particular access monitoring rule here. So we have the access monitoring rules. What's next? All right, so we leave the setup area. We move to the periodic area. So we perform an access monitoring check, right? I'm not going to run it. I'm actually going to assume that it's been run, and then what I do now is I check the access monitoring inquiry. Right. So we have two views for the access monitoring, right? So we have our main view, which is kind of like a work breakdown structure type of view. But rather what it does is it tells you at each level, at its top level, who actually performed the run, right? So you can tell 518, Vladimir performed this access monitoring batch job. At the second level, you can see this is the rule that was caught. We have multiple rules that were caught, then multiple rules would be sitting here. What users were caught with access to this particular function, creating and modifying legal entities? We have this list of users. And within a single user, these are the roles, privileges, and duties that give access that were captured, and this is the level of access that the user has that was given by that privilege, duty, and role. So we have a very visual, simple view, and then we have our export to Excel view. So this is a grid, very familiar view in AX. I can export it. I can export the entire list, or I can just focus on a particular user, particular role, or particular level of access, as well as the roles, duties, and privileges. So that's a summary of access monitoring. Data monitoring is very similar. Again, we start with a rule. However, what we're actually looking at here is you're identifying one internal control which might have multiple tables. So I click Edit, and I can see the list of tables that are actually included in this data monitoring rule, right? So for example, the overarching rule is being able to have visibility on workflow changes. So there's a number of tables that are involved that I want to track, and a number of fields within those tables that I want to track. How do I get this? It seems so difficult. Actually, it's not. What I do is I make sure that this Show Context menu is selected to basically display a context menu while this form is up as I drive through the system looking for tables in a form. If I wanted to pull up the customer table, I simply go into the customer form, find a field that sits within that table. I right-click it to bring up a context menu. Let's see, did I turn it on? I don't think I turned it on. And here we go. All right, so I turned it on. And now what you can see here is I can choose to capture a full table, or I can choose to capture that specific field. Now, the example I was using earlier was changes to the credit limit. So I can click into the credit limit field, add credit limit, and now I get this message that says it was added to the workflow rule. So I'm done here. I return, I refresh, and like magic, the customer table is added, and only the credit max, aka the credit limit field, has been selected. How do I initiate? I click push to SQL after I've made sure that only the tables that I want to be captured are enabled with the green check mark. So once I click push to SQL, it's enabled. There's actually synchronization taking place between SQL and the AX tables. How do I report on this? How do I view that? So under monitoring, we have data monitoring. So we have an inquiry for that as well. This gives me the previous value, the new value, the field and the table, the legal entity in which it occurred, and whether it occurred in the AX application or whether it occurred in the database, and which user made the modification and on which date. So here's just a list of examples. For example, payment terms for vendor information or any other vendor information such as address. You want to track changes. You go to data monitoring. So I want to know who can create a customer. That's access monitoring, right? So if who changed the organizational hierarchy, that's data monitoring. Let's say who are the new users and what are their names. That is the security change log, a report, right? And there's no report that of workflow and approvers if you're talking about a PO workflow or the change management workflow. So essentially you find those tables and you add it to data monitoring, and you also add it to access monitoring to get a fully fleshed out view of what changes are being made to those workflows. So here's just the views again, in case we never got an opportunity. So popular reports. And for our third topic, segregation duty rules, which I already showed, security and user change logs, which I can pull up very quickly. Security change log here. And the security change log tells you what user made the change and what actually happened to the role, right? Was it an access? Was a duty or role duplicated? Was a role or duty deleted? Was a privilege removed from duty, et cetera, right? And of course, we get a quick description of what changes actually occurred. And our user change log, which actually tracks changes to user role assignments, right? So as you can see, and it tracks not only the normal users, but Active Directory domain users that are part of a AD group. They're also captured in these reports. So monitoring inquiries, which I just displayed, and the roles and permissions inquiry. So under our security inquiries, we have the roles and permissions inquiry. It's one of our most popular ones requested from companies as well as their auditors. And it does take a moment to come up due to the volume of information that's being searched and retrieved. And while that's coming up, I'm going to make a quick mention of the license analysis. So it's still coming up. All right, so essentially for license analysis, the idea is just to reduce costs, right, and have a clear picture of how much it's costing you to upgrade your cows, right, your client access licenses. So a review of your user licenses versus your user license requirements that you find on a customer source, it's going to reveal discrepancies in the number of users for each license type you have. So the bottom line is you may be paying too much for your enterprise licenses, right? So the idea here is to reduce the total number of enterprise license users, and we have a bunch of tools for that. So we have 3 roles, right? Three reports. We have a role report that focuses on the roles. We have a user report that focuses on the users, and we have a combination report that gives you essentially all the information that you're going to need from both. So jumping back to the roles and permissions form from the last topic, this is just a view of it. So it gives me a breakdown of my security model, my roles, my duties, my privileges, what level of access is given to which menu items. And this is an at-a-glance, easy-to-filter view that can be exported to Excel. Now moving back to the license analysis, right? So I'm going to pull up our license analysis very quickly. And we have a lot of inquiries as well. So right here, I have an at-a-glance view of our license. I click process, and you have how many functional enterprise task users, self-serve users, and we also have server users, right? Even though this is not included in the 4CAL list, right? Tells you how many users are even disabled. Right? We can even perform a quick what-if analysis to determine at a specific number of enterprise-level menu items and a particular number of enterprise roles per user, and it returns a list of users who apparently appear to have overarching CAL level. So this is a way that you can find the low-hanging fruit. If you need a deeper analysis, you can pull up one of our reports. So I mentioned the combination report of roles and users. So instead of pulling up all 3, I'm simply going to pull up the full. And what you see here is another quick view of our licenses, right, by license type, and how many users are at a glance, and by percentage, are of a certain license type, right? And again, you can quickly compare this to your list on customer source to see what is actual and what is, on the system. The breakdown below actually is by user, and then by that user's roles, and then the count of roles for each user, and at each level, what are the percent for that user that are of that license type. So for example, Adam Russell here is 20% of his roles are enterprise roles, right? So standard AX only comes with the user count report, and it only tells you how many licenses your company has and how many users are assigned to each count. We have at least 3 reports that provide a bigger picture of AX licensing, as well as a number of other inquiries as well. And also a view of a visualization in the Security Manager cockpit for levels of security. So we provide the at a glance and a way of attacking the low-hanging fruit. So prior estimates from our clients have been up to 25% reduction in costs from CAL licenses at the enterprise and functional level. So our last topic, audit reports and preparation. Capturing security changes from application and database levels through the data monitoring and comprehensive security level access and reporting and inquiries with drill down capabilities. Now, the shorthand version of that is essentially the visualization. The visualization offered by the Security Manager cockpit, as well as the inquiries that allow you to drill down and the matrix reports. All these are great tools for auditing. And we also offer services around managing, well, let's talk about the snapshot. We have a snapshot capability in which you can see at 2 different points of time what changes have been made to your overall security model, and you can do comparisons by role as well, and the Power BI integration. So moving back to services, right? So we come on site or we work remotely, depending on what you prefer, and we basically walk you through AX security, right? And the best practices around AX security and making the auditors delighted or satisfied with what you have set up and how you track it. So we offer basically on-site services where we come on-site and we work with you and your business process owners to come up with a best way of modifying your roles to suit certain needs, whether it be segregation of duties for compliance or minimum licensing for your cows, and we restructure your roles with you. And then we apply the other layer of the segregation of duties, defining your roles or allowing you to use our role set as a starting point and modeling your internal controls within AX. And then we implement the updated security model, right? So a typical discovery, design, develop process, and the deployment is the actual test, which is, are your users able to complete their jobs, and are you able to delight your auditors? And we have a special service offering, which is a security and auditing assessment, estimated anywhere from 50 to 100 hours. But this is very malleable, depending on the needs of your business. We identify high-risk areas, right? We provide you with an initial report of current state, and then we work forward from there, right? We identify the segregation of duty conflicts and violations and how the standard conflict resolution should occur. Also suggesting a best way for you to run the approvals for the conflict resolutions and how to mitigate and monitor moving forward. So, for very important tasks, we offer a very useful and easy-to-use tool. User interface is great. You have the capability of monitoring and tracking at the user level and at the security administrator or system admin level. So the main thing is you're reducing the cost of security, management and implementation and auditing. Here's our, we'll send the deck out to you as well as a couple of other things. I will turn it over to Amir, and if there's any questions and if there's any quick questions, we can answer those. And if there's any questions past our time, we can follow up with you and provide responses remotely and through email. Thank you, everybody. I return it to Amir.
Thanks, Cody. I see a couple questions in the window pane. I'll go ahead and read those. And then, as Cody mentioned, if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to one of us directly or to me, and then I'll facilitate it to both Cody and Corey, and we'll get back to you guys very promptly. So the first question is from Anna Nguyen. It says, from the access perspective, how can we report which user or users have access to customer vendor item master or specific access to menu items, such as creating invoices or approving invoices? Were you able to get that one, Cody?
Yes. So this one relates to how you use the access monitor to view, basically, for the example was the customer information. So I'm just going to pull up the inquiry and see if that answers the question. And Amir, can you reread the question so that I can basically pinpoint the answer?
Sure. So from the access perspective, how can we report which user or users have access to customer vendor item master or specific access to menu items, such as creating invoices or approving invoices?
Yes. Okay, so the answer is right here. So here's a rule that we created around the, I think it was around the table or around the click, the create a new vendor function, right? We identified a specific menu item and we captured it and we track it and we see who has the ability to run through this process after clicking this button, right? So basically you click the vendor and a new vendor form comes up. Based on this, and I can filter on establish vendor. I misspelled it. Right, so I can focus on that particular rule, and by focusing on the rule, I can see who actually, of all of my users, has the ability to create a new vendor, and which roles and duties and privilege actually gives that access. And at what access level do they have it? So that would be the quick answer to that, is that you can use the access monitoring log after building a rule. Okay,
Thanks, Cody. We have two more. The first is
got it.
Juan. We are currently implementing AX in the cloud. Is this product already available for that platform?
All right, so we're talking about AX 2012 on the Azure platform, I believe, and our product works as long from AX 2009. We have an AX 2009 version. We have AX 2012 across, broad spectrum of the product actually is available for. So from feature pack to R3, essentially, the actual platform isn't really a factor as long as we can import our model file in model store. That's what's important, and you'll be able to use the ASM software.
Yes, and just to kind of tag along to Cody's point there, we can deploy it as the AX model file in any of the primary layers, whether it's CUS, ISV, or VAR, and we can also deliver it as an XPO. That typically is a little bit on the install side, but both those are the typical methods that we deploy ASM into your environment. And then I see another question here from Tim. It says, in regards to the security tracer, does that allow you to restrict access per field in a particular menu business process, or is it limited to the developed security privileges and duties?
Okay, so first I bring it back up. I bring up the security tracer, either in the security manager or from the main menu. All right, and as I pull it up, can you reread the second part of that question?
Sure. Is it limited to the developed security privileges or duties?
All right, no. So as you can see, what I have to do is I select a role, I select a duty, or I can select a privilege, right? If I select a role and I change the access, well, let me just choose something very easy, a very easy, very small role, just so that it doesn't take very long to load. But essentially, the answer is going to be, from the trace or with the trace information, which, by the way, I can export these AOT objects and the menu item type as well as the suggested level of control to give access to that. I can export that into an Excel file. So first of all, I can take it away from here. Second, these are securable objects, so menu items essentially. So when I make the change and the wizard comes up, and it should be coming up any second now. Okay, good. So access to the sales orders, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm changing to edit level from no access. So this is the answer to that. So I have a series of choices. to change the security of this role based on what's here under trace, I can, A, reuse that permission that gives access at full control and, choose from a list of different privileges or duties that give that access. B, I can create a brand new privilege, or C, I can choose from one existing privilege that should give access to all sales orders, right? So I hope that answers the question. And this is just one method of collecting secureable objects and menu items in order to build security around it.
So that seems to be the tail end of the questions in the panel. As mentioned earlier, guys, thank you for joining. If you do have any questions afterwards, please feel free to submit them. We'll be happy to field those questions for you, and we'll get back to you guys soon. And we also are open to any future suggestions for webinars around security management and auditing, reporting, compliance, and segregation of duty. Thanks again for joining, and that concludes this webinar. And thank you, Cody, for the presentation.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Thanks.